Hi, Howard.
Good afternoon, Stephanie.
Nice to be with you. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in Louisville, Kentucky, but I moved to the Washington, D.C. area when I was 3 years old, and have lived in all three jurisdictions in Washington, D.C. I started out in Northern Virginia and have spent most of my life in Maryland, but also lived for almost 10 years in D.C. itself.
So you're a local person, deep D.C. roots.
I've been here for a long time, though I guess like Julius Rosenwald, I come from German immigrants who came to the Midwest. So,
like Julius's people. Where do you know where in Germany they were from?
I do. Two little towns called Edelfingen and Bad Mergentheim. These were my grandparents. So, a long time ago. But, you know, like Julius Rosenwald came as penniless, or as his parents came as penniless immigrants and became merchants.
Well, that's interesting. That does give you a real connection to the story.
A perspective on it, and also, to my mind, driven by that story, also a sense of justice, you know, to support immigrants today and the like.
So Justice, you're a lawyer. How did that come about?
Well, growing up in the Washington, D.C. area where politics and government is pervasive, my father was a lawyer with the federal government for his entire career, and I grew up sort of learning the alphabet soup of Washington, D.C. government agencies. And even though my name is Howard, actually my full name, my first name is Michael, so I have always been inspired by the prophet Micah and the concept of doing justice as a result of that.
That's beautiful. So where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to college and then law school?
I got away from the D.C. area. I went to college 4 years in New Hampshire at Dartmouth, which probably also enhanced, trying to bring this back to the story, that enhanced my love of the outdoors and national parks, which is part of our mission here. So I was in undergraduate at Dartmouth and went to law school at Harvard.
And did you specialize within what part of the law were you drawn to?
I had a long interest in economics and trade and competition issues. So I have been an antitrust lawyer for my career. Not a lot of antitrust issues related to the Julius Rosenwald story from my perspective, but and I spent 10 years myself working for the Federal Trade Commission, but otherwise practice in the private sector.
So how did you come to the Julius Rosenwald story, or how did it come to you? How did it find you?
It draws together a couple of my interests. As I said, I love the outdoors and our national parks. I grew up as a family traveling around the United States to our national parks, and I love the iconic national parks across the country: Yellowstone, Grand Canyon, Glacier, Yosemite. All of our national parks I love too, and I've been to many and keep trying to get to more. But there are in addition to those iconic parks, there are all the National Historic Parks, and the C&O Canal is practically in my backyard, and I love the C&O Canal, and it is a National Historic Park. And then we've seen, particularly under President Obama, expansion of the national parks to tell more of our national story, bringing in things like Stonewall Inn, and
Fort Monroe.
Many of our additions to our park to tell more of the American story, which I think is tremendous. So part of my interest stems from that. I'm involved in the National Parks Conservation Association, where I serve on the Mid-Atlantic Council, supporting our parks across the country, but particularly in this area. And that's one of the interests that brought me to this. I'm also Jewish, and but believe in particularly the Jewish values, including the value of philanthropy and making the world a better place, which I think Julius Rosenwald fills. But because of that interest, I've been very involved. I'm the immediate past president of the Capitol Jewish Museum, which is saving a 150-year-old historic synagogue building in Washington and building a museum around it to tell the story of Jewish history, but not just for the sake of history, but for learning from the past to inspire people for today. And again, that's part of what, to me, is inspirational about the Rosenwald story. And it's a story, I think, that maybe is becoming better known today, thanks to efforts, including yours, writing about him and the Rosenwald schools. But I think it's one more story that deserves to be told, and creating a national park which tells his story and the story of the Rosenwald schools, preserving those schools, I think is a fantastic project.
What would you see people taking from a visit to such a park?
So I think that there are a number of stories that come together. I mean, Julius Rosenwald's inspiration from leading Sears Roebuck, making a huge amount of money as a result, but then turning that into doing good in the world. I think the story of philanthropy, the story of supporting those in need, but he also supported things like the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, in addition to the story of getting together with Booker T. Washington and building 5,000 schools across the South to support education. So, I mean, I think that the importance of education as creating opportunities for people is an important part of the story. I do think at the same time, and I also would emphasize Black-Jewish relations as part of this story. I think there is a long history of connections, partly because Jews, like Blacks, faced a lot of discrimination, things like restrictive covenants on real estate, preventing Jews from living in certain neighborhoods. And we can think of this as history, but as recently as marches in Charlottesville for the Unite the Right March, where the white supremacists were not only attacking blacks, but walking down the street shouting, "Jews will not replace us," tells me how important it is that we remember these stories and learn from them. But as I say, Jews and blacks from people like Abraham Joshua Heschel walking arm in arm with Martin Luther King in Selma, to others, during the freedom marches, to other stories that I think bring Jews and blacks together, and I think that that's an important piece that we need to remember. I also, having said all of that, I think it's important. I think telling the Julius Rosenwald story is a good thing, but we can't make him out to be a complete hero at the same time. I mean, he was a human being,
right.
And even today, we well recognize that building these schools predated Brown versus Board of Education. They were schools for blacks. They weren't schools for bringing blacks and whites together. Julius Rosenwald was a human being. He wasn't a perfect person, and so we can't make people out to be heroes, but we do have to tell their stories to inspire the rest of us today.
For sure. And like Booker T. Washington, he was a product of his time. And he was looking ahead in the sense of knowing that education was the tool without which you simply could not build the future that I think both of them anticipated. It's so interesting that he himself, of course, never finished high school and never had the opportunity to go to college or become an extremely well-educated person himself, but he definitely saw that as the route forward, just the way Booker T. Washington did.
I think that, I have always viewed our public school systems as sort of the great equalizer that brings people together and gives them opportunity. It's far from enough, and I think even Rosenwald clearly recognized that, creating the Rosenwald Fund in addition to the schools to provide support for people in the arts and society. So, it's far from enough to say that you send people all to the same schools, but I think it is an important element of our society.
The other thing that I think he was aware of was that the process of working together was in itself a positive thing. And one thing I'm interested in is the way now the effort that you're seeing in many places to preserve the Rosenwald schools almost replicates that initial effort. You've got people from the community and people from outside the community coming together, working together to try and preserve the schools so they can tell their story for the next generation.
Right. Well, the fact that he didn't just fund these schools on his own. As we all know, he provided part of the funding along with a challenge grant to the community, which provided the majority of the funds to build the schools. That may be commonplace today when people give money, but he really was at the cutting edge in coming up with that at the time.
One of my favorite stories about Rosenwald was a journalist was interviewing him, and they were at Sears, and they were outside, and the journalist said to him, "How does it feel to have all these people working for you?" And Rosenwald said, "I don't really think of them as working for me. I think of them as working with me." And I think that was very much the spirit of the schools, and that was one of their strengths.
I was looking at some of his quotes, and one of his quotes is that's interesting. Just because someone has a lot of money or does not make them smart.
Right.
I think he recognized, as someone who started with humble roots, that he recognized the value of hard work, he recognized the value of education, and money may have facilitated what he was able to accomplish, but it wasn't an end in itself.
Oh, and he always attributed a certain amount of his success to good luck. He was in the right place at the right time.
But it's, as I said, I think it's a story, and if we can, I am honored to serve on the board of the campaign to move this project forward. I think we have accomplished a huge amount getting legislation through Congress so that now the National Park Service is doing its special resource study towards creation of the park. And I should emphasize how honored I am to serve on the board of the campaign. The group of people that have been brought together, Dorothy Cantor, who is the driving force behind the campaign, people like Bob Stanton, who was the first black only today to lead the National Park Service.
Inspiring.
As yourself, as I've mentioned, with your research into the Rosenwald story, the group of people who are pushing this project forward is absolutely amazing.
It's a thrilling journey, and I hope we're all together at the dedication of the park.
We're moving forward. We're making great progress, and that is within our sights. So hopefully, it will continue to make that happen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.